do without acknowledging that, without kind of nodding to the context that we're all operating in. I will say at PFJ, one of the things we try to be very intentional about is sharing good news when we have it, which I think is really important when you're working in public defense generally, and even more important right now. And I authentically think that collaborative defense and the ways in which it's being adopted by defenders around the country, and the way they're using this approach to better support the people that we're serving, is legitimately good news. And so I hope that this presentation, I'm going to give it with that intention to try and share some good news with you all. And I hope it's a bright spot among everything that's going on right now. So with that, let me get going. What is Partners for Justice? We're a national nonprofit organization. We work to help public defenders around the country expand and defend their clients inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom. So at a very high level, that's who we are. I think you are all likely familiar with sort of our reason for being, which is that we're facing a public safety crisis in this country. We have people going to jail about 10 million times every year. A quarter of those people are arrested more than once. The vast majority of those arrests are for misdemeanors rather than serious or violent felony crimes. And this is leaving us with a carceral system that impacts the lives of nearly half of American families. Meanwhile, we're spending obscene amounts of money on prisons, jails, parole and probation, policing, the judiciary, other legal system costs, more than $180 billion a year, far exceeding what we spend on indigent defense. And it's had essentially no impact on the crime rate. So we know we have this problem. We're spending a ton of money that is not really solving it. And being incarcerated has a significant impact on people's lives. It reduces lifetime earnings, it's associated with lower life expectancy, and it's harming the next generation, as more than half of incarcerated people are parents. So this is the crisis. This is why we founded Partners for Justice. We believe that there's a way to break this cycle of poverty and incarceration that is through working within the public defense system, working within public defense to reduce incarceration, to address the issues in a person's life that often contribute to that arrest, and to fend off the consequences of legal system contact that often are contributing to reincarceration, resulting for better outcomes for clients inside the courtroom, but also outside the courtroom, as we know that many people are, most people in fact, are coming back into communities and need to pick back up with their lives after their legal system contact. Why public defense? I am probably preaching to the choir in this audience, in this group, but we believe at PFJ that public defense is one of the most critical leverage points to address the public safety crisis in America, and that's for three reasons. First, we think that public defenders have been overlooked. Most reform initiatives, most philanthropic efforts have focused on policing, have focused on prosecution. We think those are very worthy efforts. I would also argue that perhaps you're fighting an uphill battle in certain parts of the system that are designed to be prosecutorial. There's also been significant focus on reentry. We think that's fantastic, but also why wait until people have already been harmed by the carceral system and are coming out the other side? So public defenders, meanwhile, are kind of sitting over here, often ignored by efforts to reform the criminal legal system, often underfunded, always underfunded, and have immense reach, working with about 80% of people who are accused of crimes. Public defenders are upstream in the process, often assigned at arraignment or perhaps even earlier. There's a very low barrier to entry for individuals to access a public defender. You're literally assigned one. You have a constitutional right to one. You need one to get through your legal case. So we're not out there trying to, recruit participants to come to us. And defenders are the only actor in the legal system with full legally protected confidentiality, providing the opportunity to foster trust and elicit clients' true needs and priorities. So we think that public defense is a natural entry point and a not often enough recognized entry point if you're trying to change outcomes for people facing criminal charges. And that's part of the reason it's where we have chosen to focus. Now, we know that public defenders are not often the focus of reform or investment, but there has been a lot of innovation within the field. And it's important to us to recognize that and sort of build on it in our own work, from the introduction of social workers in defense agencies to models like holistic defense or community-oriented defense. And so when we started PFJ in 2017, one of the things that kind of prompted us was a familiarity, a knowledge of, this innovation that had been happening in individual offices in different places around the country, but also a recognition that it wasn't spreading as far or as fast as one might have hoped. And that was part of the reason we started PFJ, and one of the kind of initial questions that we explored in developing collaborative defense. How can we, get this innovation farther, faster in the field to reach as many clients as possible? So as we started working with defenders, we started observing their practice, having the opportunity to see a lot of different things around the country. There were a few things that we realized and that really informed our development of the collaborative defense model. First, we heard from a lot of defenders that they really admired holistic defense. They really admired community-oriented offices that were further down the track, but they didn't know where to start, or they felt like going down that path meant operating a certain way that wasn't necessarily a fit entirely for their jurisdiction. And we realized that any solution we developed had to be adaptable, had to be relevant to a very hyper-local context, where even courtrooms next door to each other in the same courthouse might not have the same culture, let alone two counties or states looking the same. We also found that it was really helpful to kind of start the conversation from the result that we're looking for and getting clients what they need, rather than, oh, we need to implement this practice or this role or this structure in an office, because every office is different, every jurisdiction is different. And so reframing that challenge around how do we deliver a great client experience, how do we get folks the services that they need, opened up a lot more solutions while aiming toward a common result, a common goal. And that also kind of goes to the next thing that we learned, which is that, we want to keep that end result in mind as a North Star when we're thinking about collaborative defense, but we also really want to let go of perfection. And we're kind of encouraging, our whole approach is kind of encouraging offices to just take a step in the right direction. We also saw a lot of individual defenders who were practicing in a very expansive client-led way already and getting great results. And that kind of individual level change in representation was critical, continues to be critical. But we also saw, I think, very clearly that it couldn't stop there. We met a lot of attorneys or social workers in an office who were calling up their friend from high school who now worked for a housing provider to help this client, or on their lunch hour calling around to treatment programs to try and get this client a bed somewhere. And this doesn't get solved by any individual stretching further on their own, no matter how heroic their individual efforts are. And so we really wanted to focus on defender offices putting in place systems and staff resources that enable them to practice in a more expansive way, so that this type of defense becomes standard practice rather than sort of ad hoc striving. And so it meant, again, really that focus on not just individuals, but systems, and also on resourcing to make this possible. And then I think we also saw a number of different models for how defenders can meet their clients' legal and non-legal needs in terms of what they offer in-house and where they partner with other stakeholders. But almost never making sense to do absolutely everything in-house at the defender themselves. So we started with individuals, we then focused on agencies. We think also having a robust sense of the landscape of other service providers and stakeholders and working collaboratively with them was a key ingredient for success. And all of this, I think, really spoke to a core kind of reimagining for us of the value proposition of what public defense can offer, that a more expansive form of representation would offer new ways for public defenders to contribute to safety, to economic opportunity, to health, and which then in turn kind of comes back to that resourcing question. How do we get the resources required to best support clients and help them avoid harm? So those were some of the things, some of the principles, I guess, or insights that informed us in developing PFJ's collaborative defense model. Wanting to create something that spoke first to client experience and priorities, that expanded the value proposition of what public defenders can offer, and that stayed focused on the core purpose of indigent defense. So collaborative defense, this is the model that we came up with. All of this kind of exploration led us to, and that we now help defender agencies implement in various ways across the US. In a nutshell, what is it? It means starting with outstanding legal representation. That's the foundation on which anything else has to be built. That is enhanced, and this is where we really come in, with wraparound support to access social services and other forms of legal representation for clients, and by expanded use of storytelling and mitigation. All of which is led by each client's priorities, and in an ideal world, extends from arrest through post-conviction support. So that's at a high level collaborative defense. It's building on that foundation, again, which is essential, of strong, fierce legal representation, to add access to additional services, additional enhanced use of mitigation throughout the criminal case. Sounds easy, right? How do we do it? How do we get there? How do we implement it? We created a framework with 6 elements for offices to bring, leaders to bring to their offices, with the idea that we wanted to make this approachable, make it adaptable, that an office can start where it's most needed and where it's most feasible for them. And that each element of the model is a spectrum, that different offices may, lean in more in one area versus another, depending on their context, depending on the resourcing that's available to them, depending on what their clients need the most. So I'll talk briefly about, each of these 6 elements, and then I'm going to talk about what Partners for Justice does. Actually, what do we actually do to help offices implement this? The first is around having vision. The idea that office leadership should have a vision for their office's defense representation that aligns with these kind of collaborative, holistic, client-centered, you can call it a lot of different things, align with these ideas, and that vision is clear to staff and to the communities that they serve. So we stand for something and everybody knows it. The second element, ask the right questions, is about making sure that clients are consistently asked about their priorities and about other aspects of their lives, to outside of their legal case, to identify potential risks or issues that the client may not even be aware is coming, or aware that the public defender can help with. So for example, this is, asking your client if they were arrested in their privately rented apartment, so that you can help them head off an eviction notice that may be coming as a result of the case. If you didn't ask where they're living, what kind of housing they're living in, you would never know that eviction is coming. You would never be able to alert them to that fact or connect them potentially with housing counsel. The next element of the model, empowering the client, has 2 components. The first is basically customer service, setting expectations with clients about how you're going to work with them, and then meeting those expectations as often as you possibly can. And the second is really orienting representation around a true partnership with clients, making sure that they have the information that they need to make decisions about their case to the best of their ability. The next 2 elements are really that wraparound service support, ensuring clients are connected with the social services and the non-criminal legal expertise, whether that's civil, family, immigration, that they need to address the priorities in their lives. Could be housing, employment, health-related, substance use, access to public benefits, custody matters, basically whatever is important to the client that has a nexus with their criminal case. That's what we want to help them connect with services to address. And then finally, we're looking to change the narrative in each client case. And this is about mitigation, but it's not traditional mitigation. It's not saving it for your most serious cases and doing a 100-page memo that is a social history and et cetera, et cetera. It can be that, but it's not always that. It's about using mitigation widely, making mitigation arguments at every opportunity, not just sentencing, making it persuasive rather than clinical, incorporating the proactive steps that the office is taking with the client, that the client is taking to change their situation, rather than just looking retrospectively at their social history. So it's really a more expansive definition and kind of use of what what mitigation can provide. So that's collaborative defense in a nutshell. Those are sort of the 6 things that we say to defenders, hey, pick an area. There are low-hanging fruit and there are more ambitious things that you can do, but pick an area and please do something. And if you want to do all of the things, that's also great. But let's take some steps in at least one area to try and improve experience and outcomes for your clients. So how do we help? How does PFJ help defenders do this? Well, our flagship program is our client advocate program. The goal of this is to make implementing collaborative practice as easy as possible for defenders, to make it plug and play. So if a defender wants to participate in the client advocate program, we will recruit client advocates, usually early career professionals from a national talent pool, to embed at their office. We will employ the advocates if they need us to, or the defender can do it. We provide specialized ongoing training to equip them for their role, which is really that, accessing social services, accessing legal expertise, preparing mitigation aspect of the model. We also train them in issue spotting and to work in a client-led way. So they're touching on some other pieces of collaborative practice as well. And then advocates work one-on-one with clients, typically who are referred by their attorneys, usually on 2 or 3 different intersecting service needs, but sometimes on as many as 7 or 8 things. It's really led by what the client needs and what their priorities are. And they also record their work and often their clients' stories and successes in a compelling way that attorneys can then use as mitigation in the legal case. They tend to work in 6 main areas. It's really, again, driven by client priority, but there are some themes in the type of work that they do. We see a lot of access to housing resources, referral to emergency housing, referral to employment programs, helping clients access benefits or, supports to meet basic needs that they're entitled to, access to medical care, mental health treatment, substance use treatment, a lot of criminal case support. So that could be mitigation, but also things like just completing court requirements, completing diversion programs, negotiating fines and fees, navigating stay away orders, getting your stuff back from the police, a lot of different needs that are related to the criminal case itself. A few things that are different about advocates compared to a typical case manager. One is that client-led aspect. 2 is that when advocates make a referral, it is not a sheet of paper with phone numbers to call. Advocates are usually the ones who are calling 8 different transitional housing programs to find a bed, or researching anger management classes in Spanish. And they are the ones advocating for their client to be accepted, to get access to those resources, to make an exception when there's a policy that is preventing, clients from getting what they need. And advocates are approaching each of these service areas with an eye not toward just social service needs, but also toward where another form of legal counsel may need to get involved as well. So it's really bringing that social service and legal aspects together. So that's a little bit about what advocates do. We started the client advocate program in 2018, and we've scaled it pretty quickly since then. We had 10 advocates to start with. We have about 115 now in 20 different offices. Last year, we served about double the number of clients that we did in 2022, and we are on track this year to serve about 10,000 people directly. And we are equally focused at the same time on maintaining service quality, not just volume of people that we serve. And we look at that through 2 kind of main metrics. Our clients tend to be really engaged, and we want to keep it that way. About 90% of our clients who were referred to an advocate last year were actively involved in working on service goals, meaning they at least saw some value to the advocate that they were working with. And last year, advocates were able to complete their client service goals about 80% of the time. It doesn't always mean that client, found a permanent apartment, but we were at least able to refer them to a housing provider. Doesn't always mean that client is, fully employed in the job of their dreams, but we were able to meet their need for a job placement program. So it's that sort of outputs level, but about 80% of the time we are able to meet those goals. And I'll just share one story with you from the client advocate program about a man named Rodney, who was a client who actually was with us for about 3 years. So he had more than one advocate who worked with him. He was referred by the attorney on his latest felony case. He had already had a pretty lengthy conviction history. as a result of some substance use issues, a long period of being unhoused. And over the course of those 3 years, Rodney's advocates helped him complete his probation, get a phone, find a job, find a place to live, get medical care. He has now been over a year sober. And one of the most meaningful things to him, in addition to those sort of tangible services, was just the way that his advocates treated him. He said about one of his advocates, "She was just so nice to me. I never had that type of person when I was living on the street. She helped me get through probation, and I would have never done it on my own." So all of the services and statistics aside, I like to include Rodney's quotes, Rodney's story, because I think one of the most important things about the client advocates is that they treat the folks that they work with like human beings who are deserving of basic respect and decency. And it's hard to measure, but it's one of the core parts of the program. So that's our client advocate program. That is our flagship. We're able to serve thousands of clients directly, partnering very deeply with defender agencies. And we love those partnerships because they give us sort of direct impact, but they're also very resource intensive. And when we looked at sort of the speed with which we were working with defenders across the country, we thought, boy, there are over 3,000 counties in America. And at this pace, we're not going to get through them fast enough. So a few years ago, we launched our capacity building program to help us scale collaborative defense more quickly. In these projects, we work with defender leadership on more of an advisory basis to implement collaborative defense practice. That could look like strategic planning help, training, creating manuals and toolkits, helping with project management. It's really sort of bespoke technical assistance work. We're also working in that practice on a public-facing collaborative defense toolkit, which will make a bunch of our resources and tools publicly available. I'll give an early plug because I think we're going to be releasing that in June, the first version of it. And between those two programs, we're now working in about 20 states in most regions of the country, urban, rural, state, county, progressive, more conservative, more resource, less resource. We're trying to demonstrate that no matter your context, collaborative defense can work. We need to get a little more coverage in the Southwest and the Northern Midwest. So if anyone here knows a defender who wants to do this kind of work, put us in touch, but we're getting there. I have about 2 more slides, and then I'm going to hand it over to Paul. 2 things that I think are critical to, again, kind of scaling this type of practice. It takes money to operate this way, and we recognize that. I mean, defenders, individual attorneys cannot and should not do everything that we're talking about. Lawyers alone are not the answer to solving this problem. And we want to help public defenders get the resources that they need to appropriately staff their agencies to practice in a collaborative way. So another thing that we do is offer defenders support with mobilizing resources, and that can include direct fundraising support, prospecting for philanthropic or government grant opportunities, ghostwriting, serving as the grant applicant if the PDO isn't able to for some reason. It includes making the case for public defense. We do literature reviews that we share widely with public defenders. We've created a bank of evidence briefs in different areas that are useful for making this case, collecting and analyzing our own data. We'll create messaging for chief defenders who are advocating for budget. We'll testify in support of funding requests. And we also help with award management if that's something the defender needs. That can be preparing reports, working on compliance stuff, more data collection, actually administering funds in some cases. And then we also work to change the national conversation around public defense, because we think that's another important part of moving the field in this direction, moving the expectation of what it means to be a defender in this direction. So media is a part of that. The evidence tools that I mentioned are a part of that. And evaluation is a key part of that. We believe in this model because we have seen it firsthand. We hear from our clients what it means to them. But we know that rigorously designed external evaluation is a huge validator, especially for policymakers. So we are very happy to be partnering with Paul to study our work in a couple of different places. And I will stop talking here and hand it over to him to talk about the research work that we're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Although before I get into the evaluation, let me just pause for a second and ask if there are questions for Rebecca so far. Again, we should have plenty of time at the end to talk about general questions, but I just wanted to make sure if folks have things about the model that she shared that they wanted to raise now, that there's an opportunity for that. Okay. All right. So maybe we'll have more of a chance for some discussion later on. So I want to talk a little bit about some ongoing evaluation efforts. I'm kind of a numbers guy, and I wish I had numbers to show you today. I'm not actually going to show you particular numbers, but uh,
Oh,
I
sorry to interrupt. It's not. It's showing the whole desktop, not just the.
oh, okay. Let me,
You might just have to full screen. I'm not sure.
yeah, let me try that again here. Sorry about that. Thanks for the tip. Appreciate that. Okay, are we
Perfect.
better now?
Yep.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Torin. Uh, I came, when I first met Rebecca a number of years ago, I was very excited about Partners for Justice and what it was doing. And part of that comes from my own previous research, doing an evaluation of the Bronx defenders, the holistic model. That work just, I think, suggests some of the powerful impacts that the holistic defense model can have, right? Huge improvements in client outcomes, huge reductions in incarceration, cost savings, no adverse impact on public safety. So really, I think compelling evidence as to the benefits of the work that folks on this call do, the work that public defenders can do. And so that was great to be involved in that research. But of course, and if we were starting a new public defender organization today, as I know, I see Jim on the call. He's thought deeply about that problem, right? Other folks here, you know, I think it's fair to say that based on the evidence, ideally we'd want to start a new holistic organization and incorporate those principles. There was, of course, I think, an important question that I was left with at the end of that research, which is, well, what about all the public defenders that are already there, already existing, right? And we can't start anew. So, how do we make them more holistic and be able to take some of the ideas where the evidence suggests it's so valuable and graft them into existing organizations that have their own concerns and needs and structures. And so when I learned about Partners for Justice as its model, one of the things that just made me so excited was that it seemed like they were innovating in answering that question and addressing that need. And so it's been fun to think about how to do an evaluation. So I'm going to talk about some work that we've been trying to do locally close to me. I'm in Philadelphia, and adjacent to us, there's a local county, Delaware County, Pennsylvania, which has been working with Partners for Justice for a number of years, and we're working together with them on an evaluation. We've also done some work with Harris County in Houston, and are spinning up some new work in Los Angeles evaluating the model. And I hope that as I talk about some of the kind of questions and issues that arise with evaluation, I know that there's in kind of indigent defense world more broadly, I think people recognize there's a lot of appetite for wanting to be able to demonstrate impact and where possible, measure the impacts of the things that we do for a number of reasons, kind of improving the quality of the services we provide in client experience, but also, of course, because that can be compelling for policymakers and, the people who have to fund the services that we offer. And I hope that some of the principles, as I'm talking about this specific evaluation, might be useful as folks think about how do they evaluate other activities that they do. Right, so to evaluate the collaborative defense model, really what we're thinking about here is trying to get some outcome that we care about. It could be a process outcome, right? Where people refer to services. It could be something about their criminal case, right? Where did they end up with a favorable sentence, a dismissal? It could be things that happen outside of the system, right? Were they able to maintain stable housing? But whatever the outcome is, right, we want to take clients who have access to collaborative defense services and compare them to otherwise similar clients that don't have access to those same services, and compare the difference in outcomes. And to the extent that we see improvements in those outcomes, if done, in an ideal way, we'd be able to know that that's some of the impacts of having access to these services. Now, of course, in doing that sort of analysis, there's really two big problems that arise, right? First of all, to do that sort of comparison, you need some sort of data that covers both clients who have the services and clients who don't, right? Rebecca mentioned that PFJ has engaged in concerted efforts to try and measure when they make service referrals, what sort of thing, are clients getting to the anger management classes or to the drug treatment. When we don't have an advocate working and keeping track of that, we may not have great data on those outcomes, right? A lot of our evaluations have initially focused on criminal justice data sources where we get data jurisdiction-wide, and so we can look at people who have client advocates, but also other folks in the system, including folks who may not even connect with the public defender at all, who may not have the services. The other big challenge that arises, of course, is, it's a referral process. We send people to client advocates because we think they're going to potentially benefit from the services that can be provided. And so if collaborative defense is working the way it's intended, it's probably the case that the clients who work with advocates are going to be different in important ways from those that don't work with advocates. And so how do we account for that? And how do we deal with that, right? And the particular concern is that there might be, if we don't account for those differences, there might be impacts of collaborative defense that we're misattributing to the model when actually it has something to do with these differences across clients. So some of you may be familiar with an approach called propensity scores, which is one way when we have kind of different populations that are getting some sort of a service or treatment that is used in the evaluation space to try and measure differences. If you've never heard of that, that's fine. I'm going to explain to you how it works. The basic idea, right, is you build you use data on people who receive and don't receive the program and their underlying characteristics to try and build a numeric index that you can think of as measuring each client's suitability for advocate assistance. And you do that based upon the actual assignment decisions, right? So you find, hey, these are the types of people, the types of charges they have, the types of criminal histories, right? Timing of the case, other features of the case, which this is the sort of person who normally gets referred to an advocate, and we could also find people who might look similar to them, but for whatever reason aren't referred to advocates. And so once we have this index, right, if we compare people who we think are otherwise similar in terms of their suitability, that might furnish a little bit of a better comparison for our purposes. So diagrammatically, right, let's imagine that, each of these pluses is a different client that comes through the door, right? And we have collaborative defense running, and so we can make some referrals out, right? There's going to be a set of clients, right? Here on the vertical axis, how suited are they? How much are they likely to benefit, perhaps, from advocate services, right? We have a subset of clients that we send to advocates and they receive some services, right? And as you might imagine, the ones who are more suitable, right, more likely to get services, but there needn't be a kind of a perfect overlap between our measure of suitability and who actually goes and sees the client. So one naive comparison we could do is just compare the red folks to the darker colored folks. But of course, again, a challenge that I mentioned is that those clients might be quite different from one another. So what propensity scores would do is it would say, hey, let's find the clients that we think actually were also pretty suitable and do the comparison there, and that might be a better comparison group, right? The challenge, of course, with that is that presumably there was some reason why those purple people, we ended up not referring them. Maybe there's something I can't observe as an analyst, right? How cooperative someone is, and so the cooperative people end up getting services and the less cooperative don't. And if that's a factor, right, then again, we run into this problem that are we attributing to CDM things that about like cooperativeness that we just can't observe in the data and haven't properly controlled for. That's what researchers would call an omitted variable problem. So is there a way we could improve upon that? So one way we might be able to improve upon it is exploit the fact that these services generally don't exist in an office, and we bring some advocates in, and then we have this new capability. So maybe we could do kind of comparisons over time, right? So we might use that same propensity score matching type idea, but instead of looking at people, all of whom could have been sent to advocates, only some of whom actually were, let's look at people who we would have been happy to send to advocates in the past had there been advocates, but we hadn't talked with Rebecca yet and figured out how to get this working in our jurisdiction, right? Now, one of the advantages of doing those comparisons is that the sort of cooperativeness, et cetera, is maybe less of a concern, those omitted variable problems, because these really are going to be folks, right, who the only reason they didn't get services is the services weren't available because they showed up at an earlier point in time. Right, so again, it's that propensity score type comparison, people who are similar in their suitability, but now people are not getting services for a external reason. Now, there's still kind of a challenge with this approach, though, right? Which is it involves comparing people in different time periods, right? So all of the purple people are at one point in time, the red people are at a different point in time. And if there's other things going on in my jurisdiction over time, maybe we're introducing new mental health treatment services, maybe something's happening with the jail, whatever it might be. Now we're potentially confounding whatever is happening over time with the effects of the program. So that's kind of the challenge with that approach. So what we're implementing for our evaluation is an approach that kind of combines the good features of both of those, something called propensity score match differences and differences. And the basic idea here is you want to add an additional comparison group of people who might otherwise be similar to the clients who go to advocates, but who for whom kind of the advocate services were never available. So in Delaware County, it turns out that our public defender only serves a fraction of all of the indigent criminal clients. There's a substantial number that gets sent to private appointed counsel, and so those clients become an unaffected comparison group. Even after CDM was operating in the public defender's office, right, it wasn't necessarily operating elsewhere. In Los Angeles, it turns out the way the rollout occurred is, Los Angeles County, ginormous county, lots of satellite individual public defender offices. We have advocates in some particular offices, but not in all of them, right? And of course, clients are assigned geographically based upon the courts that they're going to be at. And so you have a situation where there's some clients who, because of the geography of where their case is being adjudicated, aren't going to have access to advocates even after they've been introduced, right? So an advantage of this approach is that it then allows us to both deal with those temporal changes over time. And also you might say, well, hey, people who have appointed counsel might be very different from public defender clients, but we can actually account for and control for that as well, right? So again, if we think about, we have a set of people who received services, now we're introducing a bunch of folks who might be similar to them, but aren't going to receive services because, again, they're not in the public defender, they're in a different office. And if we use the kind of insights from that temporal comparison, right, and also have a control group, one of the things that you'll notice here is now we have a way, right, if I look before collaborative defense begins, right, I have same time period, same color, different symbols, so I can figure out what's the difference between public defender clients and appointed counsel clients, right? If I compare the O's before and after, right, it's the same symbol, it's the same color, it's different time periods, so I can deal with any intertemporal things that happen, right? And so this provides, we think, probably a pretty robust way of measuring what the causal impacts of having access to services are. So that's what we're working on now. There's a couple of frontier issues that we're also collaborating and working on. Of course, the gold standard for evaluation is randomization and randomized controlled trials. So in the real world context that exists in defender offices, are there ways to use randomization to try and evaluate this model? And of course, right, we see possibilities for important and measurable impacts on things that happen within the system, resolution of the case, how long, how favorable, do people show up again in the future? But obviously having data and being able to look at non-criminal outcomes, housing stability, people's income and earnings, right? Other things that logically it seems plausible that the model might impact. That's an area where we're actively developing ideas. So I think I'll stop there, and I think now it's time to hear your thoughts, reactions, and questions.
Thanks, guys. I will steal the first question unless something pops in. Rebecca, I wanted to ask what the typical funding model is for a place that's rolling out. Is it something that it's the locality is covering partial, all of it? They're applying for a grant and then using the grant for that purpose, or does it just kind of vary completely?
It does vary some. I would say our most common funding model at this point is that the Defender Office has funding from their county or their state to pay for the program. And that could be either through their regular appropriation or through some special grant opportunity that's made available. In both cases, we often are working with the Defender to obtain incremental resources for this program. We never want defenders God forbid, please don't take money away from your poor attorneys to pay for this. That would not be something we would support. But if there is, let's say leftover money in a budget one year, or in California, there are statewide opportunities that we can apply for, just as an example. Or in other states, we've been successful in advocating for an increase to the Defender's budget to support this kind of work. It's usually a pretty feel-good thing to be making the case for. And so we've been successful on that front. We do in probably 20% of our programs, we will work with the Defender to get some philanthropic support to start the program. Philanthropic funders are fickle. They do not like to fund things more than once. They do not like to fund things for a long time. So usually it's with the intention of having an initial demonstration that is funded by a foundation that we can then take to the county or the state to make the argument for funds once it's already up and running, and we have some good data and some good stories to show for it.
So that kind of demonstration, obviously the work that you're doing with Paul is kind of
will be extremely helpful.
Yeah, a significant example of that. But so far it's been kind of maybe less systematized, stories and like you said.
Yeah. We collect a good amount of sort of programmatic data consistently across our offices, just about number of people served, what their service needs are, what percentage of the time we're able to complete those services, who the clients are, are they demographics, are they housed or not, do they have jobs or not, do they have kids or not, those kinds of things. We have some pretty limited, I would say, outcomes data that we collect for our clients in certain places. And, often that's actually enough to make the case to continue a program that's been philanthropically initiated. But the work with Paul will be extremely useful in making that case as well, assuming we find that the results are positive. If they're not, you'll never hear from us again. We'll just quietly.
Well, always good to be positive. Um, uh, Paul, I wanted to ask a little bit more about the um, the propensity scoring. Is this something? So I imagine, given how unique to each uh, jurisdiction, like the propensity in LA might be different than the propensity in Philadelphia, and also just the information that you have available to make that kind of propensity judgment. Um, I don't know how far you've gotten into it. Is there anything you can kind of comment on there? Is this like, do you expect this to be like, to me, of what you presented, that seems like the hardest thing to do, or the hardest thing for me to imagine doing. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a couple of thoughts there. So first of all, it is the case when we link up data on advocates with the larger, on clients served by advocates with the larger universe of people moving through the system, that they aren't, is again, I think by design, right? It's not just a random subset, right? It is, they look different. So you want to account for that. And we see that in the data that we have in Pennsylvania. I think your intuition is right. I mean, the basic approach of how you build the models, right, is at this point, they're kind of well established. Researchers do it a lot, but obviously it's going to be a function of what data you have access to predict. It turns out that I do think that there are certain things like if you have granular data on the charge in the present case and you have information about people's criminal histories, which you can construct or get directly, those are important factors that people look at and think about, right? But with the factors that predict services in Delaware County, would I expect them to be exactly the same in Los Angeles? No, not really. And again, I think that's by design, right? I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me about PFJ is there's a lot of flexibility in how people use advocates. It's designed to deal with local problems. And so the types of tasks, how you might want to use them are going to be different. And so we kind of need a different statistical model for each different implementation. That being said, I think the basic underlying principle applies across everywhere, which is in doing these comparisons, you'd really want to do like to like, right? Have clients that look similar. And the thing that the propensity score modeling does, and again, you can, for those who like, machine learning and the more complicated, this can all be accomplished. And in fact, probably ideally today is accomplished using more kind of advanced analytic techniques like that create really good balances across characteristics. But that approach is, I think, the right approach.
Great. Well, we can see if there's any other questions that come in. But otherwise, we are getting close to the end. Oh, here's a question.
That was a good question. Caseload limits.
Yes, there are. In fact, there are both lower limits and upper limits. For programmatic reasons, we found it's not great when advocates don't have enough to do. They tend to then get too attached to their clients and have trouble setting boundaries and closing the case and moving on when the time comes. So we try to keep them with at least, and it depends a little bit on what they're doing, but if they get too far below 20, 25 cases, I get concerned about that. And if they are above 40 or 45 at a time, again, depends a little bit on the services that they focus on. We tend to get concerned about that. So they're all kind of in that range.
And of course, for those interested in evaluation, we've talked and, still working on it, but obviously there are potential opportunities using, kind of overflow when there's kind of more desire for advocates than there is capacity, et cetera, to, potentially do some evaluation around those situations.
And just as I'm looking at this question, I think part of this is also suggesting, the suitability profile might help us then project like how many, based on who seems to be suitable for advocate services, can we project like how many advocates you would need to serve everyone who is suitable, that would be great. We're not usually in a situation where we have funding for as many advocates as we need. So almost always, attorneys are kind of triaging who gets referred, and that's part of the reason, to Paul's point, that we need to understand how advocate clients are different from non-advocate clients, because attorneys are absolutely making decisions about who to refer or not. But I would love to be able to say to an office, based on your client population, if you had all the money in the world, this is how many advocates you would need to meet that need. What will the collaborative defense toolkit contain? A lot, and we are only releasing the first few sections to start with. We're going to start with some tools related to needs assessment for an office. How do you figure out, what services your clients need outside of their legal representation? So focus group protocols, a client survey, service menus, that give people some inspiration for what they could be offering. Those are some examples. And then we're doing a few different sections of the collaborative defense model. We have, tools kind of associated with each section. So for example, the one on Ask the Right Questions, we have a bank of intake tools that we'll make publicly available. For the Change the Narrative one, which is mitigation, we have mitigation handbooks. We have example mitigation memos. We have mitigation interview tools. So it's really those sort of practitioner focused, like if you wanted to actually do this in your office, here's everything we've developed and used, and we'll make it, accessible and editable for offices that want to take it on. I can't wait for you to check it out. And we're big on continuous improvement at PFJ. So we also we'll be looking for feedback from our early users on what you'd like to see next. And Torin, maybe when we do release it, I can share the link. It'll be a website, basically. I can share the link with IDRA. Yes,
you definitely should. That's something that maybe we could encourage more is people share the cool things that you're doing, because we're not at risk of flooding inboxes, and so it's great to especially hear about cool stuff like this. So definitely encourage that. Any other questions before we adjourn, or anything else you guys wanted to put out there as well?
I just thanks for being here, and we're going to have more to say in the future. So hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be back with some cool empirical results, and we can talk about how we can use those to facilitate the spread of these resources in other places.
Actually, that does bring up, I did have one question that is related to that. Are you looking back exclusively right now, or are you still like waiting for kind of data to come in, like evaluating stuff that's happening in the future? Like, are we expecting results like in a month, or are we waiting for like years for the programs to continue to run?
Yeah, I mean, for Delco, it's been operating for a while, served a substantial number of clients. We already have data from Pennsylvania that's necessary to facilitate the evaluation. We've actually run some of the the models that we've described.
I got funders who are waiting for this.
Yeah. So in Pennsylvania, fairly far along. Los Angeles is a little bit more nascent. But yeah, I actually think Delco, I'm kind of excited about. One of the interesting things we discovered about our data set as we were going through and matching people was like, oh, hey, we seem to be missing a few people that are listed in the PFJ. What's going on? And it turns out when we asked for all the criminal dockets, the Pennsylvania court said, oh, well, hey, there's a bunch of people who get moved out of criminal court completely that weren't represented in your data, which seems like an awfully good outcome, right? So we've gone back and we're getting another kind of tranche of data that we make sure that we include those folks, because obviously it'd be important to count them. But yeah, again, that's a little indication of an example of potentially an interesting outcome we'll have more to say about.
Yeah, that's great. Definitely. We'd love to have you back. If they're done end of June, I'd love to have you at the online conference. But that's a short timeline, so definitely.
have a lot
to
of
hear from
grading to do between
Yeah.
now.
Yes, but yeah, that is a not so subtle opportunity for me to plug our June online conference, which we are still accepting submissions for until the end of May or somewhere in there. But look to my email. There's a reason I have to write all this down. So yeah, if you have any questions about that, otherwise, thank you both, and we'll see everybody for the May Hydra meeting. All right.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much, Tori.
everyone. Great to
Really
see you.
appreciate the opportunity to be
Thank
here.
you both so much. This is great.
Take care.
Take care.